for being here and for joining today's webinar. This session is primarily for journalists who are curious about making the move from journalism and newsroom to PR. So I'm Nakai Salcido. I'm a former TV news producer and current PR pro. I'll be moderating today's conversation. So we have three panelists who've lived on both sides, once as journalists and now as communicators for their organizations. They're going to talk a little bit about the raw reasons behind leaving TV news or radio or print news, and what skills carried over and how those lessons have really shaped who they are today. So we'll have about 40 minutes of guided discussion, and then we'll leave time at the end for audience Q&A, maybe about 10 to 15 minutes. So please drop your questions in the chat and we'll get to as many as we can. Okay, and I'll introduce our panel at this point. Start with Ali Pardi. Ali is a Deputy Communications Director for Phoenix Fire Department. She spent nearly 7 years as a journalist at KTAR News and now leads media and public relations messaging for one of the largest fire departments in the country. She still hosts Valley Watch on KTAR and teaches FEMA public info training. Jessica Parsons is an Emmy-winning producer and reporter with almost 20 years at 3TV's Good Morning Arizona. She's also been a magazine editor and now works for Gordon C. James Public Relations, leading earned media campaigns for nonprofits and corporate clients. And then we have Adam Waltz, Public Information Officer for the Phoenix City Council. He started as a reporter at ABC 15 and is a Cronkite grad, and now uses his newsroom experience to shape transparent, community-focused city communications. Thank you all for being here. So I'll go ahead and start some of the questions that we have. Ali, I want to start with you. Tell me a little bit about what the turning point was and what made you say, okay, it's time to move to PR.
Okay, well, I like how you opened up the conversation by saying this was going to be very raw because there is a good way to describe my personality. I am very blunt sometimes. And so when I talk about making my career jump from journalism to PR, that's a really good way to describe it. Is I was so ready. I got married at the end of 2021, and it was quickly after that. As you know, most of the people on the call could probably resonate with the fact that I barely had about 10 days off for vacation, and I was collecting and scrounging what I could for my wedding and honeymoon. And I saved up all this stuff. I worked some overtime to get an extra few days for my honeymoon. And I vividly remember when we got back from our honeymoon that I had gotten the offer from the city of Phoenix. And I went in like shortly thereafter and told my news director that I was going to leave. And it was just like this whole turn of events in my life. Like I was growing up, I was getting married, and I was getting a big girl job. Not that, you know, working in news isn't that, but I was so burnt out of the financial instability, to be very raw, and also just the working my butt off, chasing stories, getting exclusives, and not really being rewarded for it in a sense. So I think the financial aspect was really what drove me out the door, coupled with I kind of just saw I saw the end. I wasn't really able to grow any further. I had done some investigative reporting, and I really had no other interest in like management in news per se, going into like an assistant director role or anything like that. And I started to tamper and show interest in wanting to do a talk show. And that was very clear that as a reporter, I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. And so I just was like, you know, what else could I do that I could use, you know, my passion and challenge myself? Because I felt like I was just kind of stuck. And so that's why I took on the new challenge with the city. And I'm so glad that I did.
That is really raw. And thank you for sharing that. Jessica, Adam, was there a moment or a reason that pushed you to make the leap?
Hi, Jessica here. So I could tell you a funny story. I was reporting on the weekend. It was 6 in the morning. I was going live in like 2 minutes, and it was a shooting. It was scary. I was dressed in my finest Ivanka dress, and there was a SWAT team behind me, and they were not letting any of the witnesses go because they had an active shooting scene there. It was a house party, and I had been on a number of these. It happens a lot in Phoenix on the weekends, and I remember saying to my photographer, can you not get the girl behind me because she's not dressed appropriately for morning TV? And he said, don't worry, I'm going to use your body to hide her body. And I thought, this isn't very sophisticated. And I caught myself saying that quite a bit. This isn't very sophisticated. And that was the price that we pay in order to tell the stories that we love to tell so much. And that was, the good that is out there in the world and the nonprofits that are doing so much good. And I was having a conversation with my husband, and he just bluntly said to me, do you want to be 60 years old in a newsroom? And I just thought, oh no, I'm heading that direction. Maybe it is time for me to really seriously think about, what else I can do. And like a lot of people, they think, well, this is all I can do. The skills don't transfer. But that's so not true, and they do transfer. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation.
Yeah, and on my front, I kind of knew my news career was coming to an end, probably in like 2019. I had a young daughter then, and we were planning for a second. And I actually had an out. I had a pretty good reference to get out of the industry in 2019, but then COVID hit early, and so I signed a contract. And 2020 was a fantastic year for local journalism. I covered four separate types of protests that summer and that year between COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests and the election protests. So when 2021 came around, we're looking at the financials. My wife's pregnant with our second kid, and it was just the writing was on the wall. It was just a matter of time. So I kind of 2020 was kind of I don't know, my personal grand finale. It was really fun. It was chaotic. It was bonkers. My wife's a nurse, so she's like COVID adjacent. I'm interviewing people who have had family members die of COVID. And so 2021 came around and I was like, okay, I think I'm ready. If I wanted to go be an anchor, I would have to move, which I'm not going to do. And the lack of pay didn't really help. So I was more ready and then just started applying and thankfully got an opportunity here at the city. So as I was toward the end of my journalism career, a lot of people told me when you know, you'll know. And I was, I think, two or three out of kind of a mass exodus out of Channel 15, because after me, a few more people in similar situations with young kids moved on and moved into different, a little more regular roles, regular jobs.
And so the reason I wanted to ask that is because I think there are a lot of people who probably resonate with a lot of these reasons and have a lot of these similar experiences. Okay, so then once we made this choice, once you made this choice and it was time to position yourself to break into PR, Jessica, when you were making this switch, what worked for you on resumes and in interviews?
It happened so quickly for me, and I kept my resume very much. I know they say not to do this, but I kept it very much the language to, that I was used to using in journalism, and I would just use words that explained as simply as I could. Not just producer. I had to really dive into what that one word encompassed, and it's a lot of stuff. So I broke it out that way, but I didn't change a whole lot, and I just felt like I wasn't. If I was going outside this market, it might have been different. But when you're in this field and you have so many connections, um, I was kind of leveraging those connections, so people kind of knew who I was already. I can tell you during the interview process, and I was interviewing with Gordon and Lisa, Gordon said one sentence to me, and it just summed everything up. He said, "You've been a catcher your whole life. Now I'm going to teach you how to pitch." And for me, I mean, it literally brought tears to my eyes because not only did he hone in on the exact sentence, but I come from a baseball family, so that really resonated with me. And what that says is, can you can you reverse engineer a story that you're going to get? And yeah, we can all do that. So you know what a good pitch looks like. You know what a good press release is. You know why you open up that email, even though you might not be able to put it into words. You know why. Now, can you reverse engineer that? And I was willing to learn, and I said, yes, let's do it. I want to learn the other side of it. So some of the things that are going to transfer over are going to be like, your writing skills, your communication skills, your news judgment. You know what's going to sell. You know what a good story is. You can tell a client, you know what, that's not going to work, but this is. Let's do this instead. They're looking to you for that type of guidance. And I think it's more powerful coming from us because we've been on that side and we can tell you what the producer is thinking, what the reporter needs, what the desk wants.
Adam, Ali, what about you? How did you pitch yourself any differently?
Well, I will tell you, my first resume out of news was really bad. And I think a lot of it is because when you talk to fellow news people for news jobs, they know what your skill set is because you say, I'm a reporter, I've never missed a deadline, I know how to do this. There's not a lot of explaining to do, but I really focused in on, the media savviness and the job that the Parks and Recreation PIO job I was looking for the media savviness, the ability to story tell was really helpful. But I unfortunately was a much more short-winded and in my original resume. But Jessica's right. I was very nervous that my skills wouldn't translate, but troubleshooting on your own, finding solutions, especially when you have events. A lot of people just look to you to find and solve the problem, even when it's not your problem. So that resourcefulness and troubleshooting, along with the writing and just the ability to hit deadlines and work efficiently, translates way more than I thought at the time.
Yeah, I very much so resonate with what Adam described. I mean, again, my brain is a million tabs open every day, as I'm sure everyone's is on this call. So I probably couldn't even describe to you what my resume looked like. I do vividly remember during one of my interviews talking about like my social media savviness and being able to storytell in multiple different ways. Obviously, I worked in radio. And so, what that means to someone that might not know, it's not just being on the radio. There's a lot of different components to it. And so being able to storytell on social media and digitally with our website and everything, I really wanted to showcase myself in that way because I knew for the job that I was hoping to get with the fire department, it was a public information specialist. And so I knew they really wanted that storyteller. They wanted a PR kind of person to come in because they've always just had their sworn captain PIOs that were responding to incidents and just telling the facts. But they really they were trying to follow the rest of the city of Phoenix's communications office with where, what PD was doing. And they were really behind the ball. And so I knew coming in that it was going to be a lot of work. And so I just vividly remember touting that John Cena followed me on Twitter, and that got a lot of giggles during the interview. But I agree. I think as a reporter or, even a producer or editor, you're a problem solver and multitasker. And if you don't get your work done, it's a clear reflection on you. And so I think being in PR, it's the same way. You're juggling a million assignments. Meanwhile, some crisis could fall down the line and then you have to go and jump on that. And that's the same thing with breaking news. All of a sudden your stories change. You still got to go live in 5-10 minutes, etc. And so it seemed like a very natural transition.
So then once you land the job, you're excited, everything's about to change for you, but then you also start thinking about, this means I'm leaving the newsroom behind. So I'm going to ask all of you a little bit about what this feels like. And it's funny because every time I bump into a former colleague, they're always asking me, do you miss it? That's the first question I get asked. So Adam, tell me a little bit about when you stepped away from the newsroom. What was the toughest adjustment for you personally and professionally?
Well, first off, I do miss it, and I loved my time at 15. Being a reporter at that level is a great single, no kid person job, and I wasn't at that point anymore. Where I could just give everything into this job because my mind is on my family now. I loved getting the scoop. I loved my time over there. I think the biggest shock to me, just as a person, was the email culture and just processes in general and different types of communication that I just had never really been exposed to. Um, I mean, when you're, in the newsroom, you have your 9 a.m. meeting, and then as just a general assignment reporter, um, usually we pitch, but toward the end of my time at 15 with new leadership, they just started sending me places. And then that's pretty much all the communication I had with my managers until like 11 a.m. And they trusted me, I trust them. You do a check-in if something happens, but I didn't have to CC my news director on everything. I didn't have to, follow up on certain things the next day. I mean, my day was very compartmentalized. So I really struggled with like this, also with the sitting still, which if you spend 5 minutes with me, is very difficult for me. But the email culture and that more formal email communication. Now I have Teams. Now I have text and like what's appropriate for who. And so it was a very big learning curve for me in more of a corporate environment when truly you're kind of like a blue collar in like a white collar setting, boots on the ground kind of person where you just grab your gear and go. But yeah, I do miss it a lot. And I think one of the other things I kind of struggled with leaving the business was where's my like sense of like moral justice gonna go? You know what I mean? Because you get into news, especially at Cronkite, holding the powerful accountable. They teach you about Ida Tarbell and all these great journalists. So I was really worried, like, well, this is my life, right? But where am I going to find this moral justice? But pitching stories and getting information out to people, and I was able to find that here in the city.
Jessica, what about you?
Adam hits on a couple of really good points, and I've had conversations with people just in this vein. So the freedom and independence that you feel as a reporter or a producer, there isn't really a ton of oversight or micromanaging because they know that you're doing the job and you're getting it done, hitting the deadline. So what I've said to people before is, if you're looking to step out, think about if you're going to go to a corporate agency, super large, and you're going to have a lot of people to go up the ladder. Your press release goes up the ladder 20 spots and then down the ladder versus maybe a smaller agency or family owned, where I am able to experience a lot of that freedom and independence where I am. And I don't know that I would have that at a huge firm. So I'm grateful for that. I think the hardest thing about leaving is the creativity and the storytelling part of it. So what I did to help with that was I just started writing stories. I started writing op-eds and I started writing articles. I started getting published again like I was in the magazine, um, just long form stories. So that helps me, to feel that piece of it. What was really tough that first year out, I was nominated for an Emmy for reporting, and that was like all I had ever wanted. And that was hard because it was so bittersweet. It was like this reminder that I'm gone and this is it, this is the last. But also, I had just started this brand new chapter, and I ended up not winning, but I at least had the nomination. So I was happy with that.
Allie?
I can resonate with both Adam and Jessica. Kind of a lot. I very much so struggle sitting still, and so I think when I made that transition, it was an entirely different new world for me. And, I know there are some folks from the city listening, and they'll probably get a good giggle out of this, but none of them are specifically from the fire department. But it was a little bit of a hot mess when I first got hired with the fire department, meaning they had it was, God love our firefighters. They're great at what they do, but they're not good at PR and organization and event planning and all this kinds of stuff. And so when I first got there, it was very overwhelming in a new environment that I was not super familiar with. And I didn't get a lot of direction at first. And so that was very difficult for me because in news, I knew, I had my 3 stories, I had my live shots at X times of the day, I knew what was expected of me. And I just kind of anticipated a similar situation of like, here's what we expect out of you. And it took me a couple months, I would say. I remember coming home and crying and laying on the couch and being like, what did I do? Like, did I make a mistake? Should I have done this? I was not pissed about the paychecks by any means, but I was like ethically, I agree with, the concept of like pushing for social justice and doing all these things and wanting to make a change. And I'm like in this blank, empty office, and I'm like, there's nothing happening. What do I do? And so once I quickly read the room and was under the impression that this is up to me, I can make this what I want, I flourished at that point. Very much so, patting myself on the back with they didn't question it. I came up with these great ideas, and I think I was really nervous at first because I was in an entirely new environment and I didn't want to be like, oh, here's all these great new things that we should do. Whatever we're doing isn't working. But once I kind of came up with some ideas or campaigns or trying to twist different, it's always the same holiday safety messaging, et cetera. Like, how can we make this more relevant or a little more catchy, that type of stuff. It really started to develop. And as we all know, what are you rewarded with when you do something good? You're rewarded with more work. And so I was very fortunate within that, pretty much within my first year, they started touting that they were going to, who I was hired under was an assistant chief, Shelly Jameson, which maybe some of you on the call are familiar with. She had a pretty substantial news career before she read the room and said PR is not going to work out for me. She actually became a firefighter, and then she worked her way up to an assistant chief level. And when she was retiring, they knew they were going to need someone at that level to handle PR, communications, et cetera. And so within my first year, I kind of heard those rumblings. So I busted my butt for that next year. I knew that promotion could be coming. I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but I wanted to show myself in a way that I could hopefully potentially get that promotion. And so within about a year and a half, I was able to promote, and it has been so much work, but it's been so rewarding because each time there's a new challenge, I take it upon myself. I come up with these new ideas. And now I've been able to build a team of 3 amazing guys that are, very similar skill sets. Some worked in news before as well. And so it's been really cool to kind of see all of this transition.
You brought up a really important point about your transition and then going into the Phoenix Fire Department. Sometimes you start working for organizations and you might be the only one. There might not be a large team, and so you get the opportunity to make it your own based on whatever your experience was. So I'm thankful for you for sharing that experience. But Ali, was there a specific skill or a part of the job that you had underestimated that you had to just like learn really fast?
A specific skill, I guess,
Or like any kind of learning curve?
I don't want to get myself in too much trouble here, but I would say politically, that was a whole new thing for me. And so obviously working within a government agency, as a reporter, these were people that I just interviewed, and I would ask them tough questions and all those kinds of stuff. And now these people are my boss's boss, and I need to be careful about how I'm acting and understanding, I'm making a run of show and a press release and all these types of things. And as Adam kind of referenced, the copying on emails and the chain of command and all these different it's an entirely different lifestyle that as a reporter you just ask questions. Of course we're respectful and you want to get along with the people around you, but when you're working in an agency as big as the city of Phoenix and with elected officials, I think that's where I really had a strong learning curve, and sometimes I still struggle with it. It's not one of those things that comes very naturally, and so at least to me. And so that's one of those that you have to really understand, mind your P's and Q's to not get yourself in trouble. And I know Adam's laughing because he is council public information officer, and so I will defer to him for the rest of this conversation.
Yeah, Adam, share your experience.
A reminder that, Ali, this is being recorded. I think one of the biggest learning curves that I'm still working on is writing it down, writing everything down, whether it's an event plan or just a meeting outline, taking notes. I think in news, I got a little spoiled where I could have an idea in my head and your broadcast writing is kind of shorthand anyway. And it's, I'm talking to people who are also understanding video. So I can say, hey, what if we do a shot like this? Or what if we do it like this? And they immediately click. And I'm like, okay, you don't have to talk about it. But I think I learned a lot, and I had a lot of opportunity for self-growth, and there still is very much so, as Ali would be the first one to tell you. But like I was a big part of planning inauguration and planning the stage script. And for a long time, I had the idea where everybody would move behind the set stage and move through the Orpheum and onto the stage in my head. And then some coworkers were like, you have to write this down because some of us other employees who are involved, they need a play-by-play step for step. So I took like a couple hours and I wrote it all down, and it really kind of like helped me and the team, and something to refer to and something we could collab on. So just the over note taking, agendas are something, I never really had to deal with, like meeting agendas, but now, I love a good meeting agenda and a plan and stuff like that. So I think sometimes I forget how kind of like raw and free, as Jessica was saying, being a reporter really was. And you are really given a lot of blind trust by your news director until you mess up. And so when you mess up, it's a big deal. And your news director or assistant news director, they're only calling you if you messed up or if you showed up on FTV Live, which unfortunately I did, but it wasn't anything I did bad. But, you're given a lot of trust. And here in the city, you have to earn trust with people who have been at the city for 15, 30 years.
I think for me, the biggest learning curve, and it's a balancing act. How can I advocate for the viewer? Because that's in our DNA, right? You strip out the bias, be objective, while at the same time protecting your client at all cost. So I had to learn, to put the client, how do I put the client ahead of the viewer? I don't, so I'm still kind of like struggling a little bit with that. I have pushed reporters back a few feet and told them, hey, it's foul. You're on private property and you know that. I never thought in a million years I'd be the one to do that. I've written statements for clients to frame them maybe a little less, like lessen the blow a little bit. Having to help them come up with those statements that we would read on the air, so we know what those statements feel like and look like. I have canceled interviews, rescheduled interviews because my client wasn't ready, whether they were physically like, I don't look good today ready, or they just weren't feeling it, all to protect them. And as a producer, I never thought in a million years I would do stuff like that. I actually said to a client the other day, I can get you out of this. Just tell me what you want to do. So now I'm like in my mind crafting ways to get them out of something. And he said, no, no, I'll do it. I said, okay, just always wanting now to protect the client that we come to know so well and love so much.
Yeah, it's a completely different perspective.
It really is.
So at this point, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about a little bit about our panelist experience and how it shapes the way they work today. So just to recap everything, they made a difficult decision to leave the newsroom. They used their skills to market themselves for a new opportunity. They got a new job in a new career field, and they faced tough parts of the job. It was the learning curve along the way. But as they've settled into this new profession, they have a valuable way and passion for storytelling that really needs to be applied to the new job. So, Jessica, I want to go back to you. How does your newsroom experience and your producer experience influence the way that you tell stories, the way that you strategize, and the way that you connect with the media now?
Yeah, I always go back to what worked on me. I know what worked on me, and I know what PR agents did, to get my attention. And so I've adopted some of those same tactics. So for instance, I'll give you like the strategy I use for media outreach. I don't like to blast things out. I curate targeted groups. I want to know, is this going to fit for them subject wise? Is this going to fit for them geographically? Is this the right fit for them? Is this a story they would do? And I just think that goes back to always thinking about the audience, who is their specific audience. I also pay very close attention when it comes to magazine, probably because I come from that world too, is what are the departments in the magazine? People have asked me before, well, how do you know? That is your biggest clue. You look at the departments in a magazine, you know exactly the stories that they're doing. And then for TV, I've got all my TVs on, all four of them. I've got every station on, and I'm always watching to see what they're doing new now next. Do they have a niche no one else has? Is there a franchise they've got no one else is doing? Fox 10 does cool homes, Channel 3 doesn't. 3TV does something good, 3TV does Field Trip Fridays. How can I now leverage some of the things, those niche franchises that they're working on, to benefit, our pitch and our client? So I'll do things like that. I had a PR agent once send me everything and it wasn't 20 back and forth emails. And so that's exactly how I do it. I send everything. Um, my my headline and my subject could double as a lower third font. It's going to be juicy, it's going to catch attention. The brief description I write as to what this story is, the who, what, when, where, why, it's written in the tone and the voice that an anchor or reporter would say on the air.
Mhm.
And that's probably the 20 years I've spent writing for people like Tess Roffles and Scott Passmore. So I'm kind of used to writing like that anyway. They love to say things like, for the first time, new this morning, all new tonight. That puts it in a context. That gives them that perspective of, oh, this is new. Let me pay attention. I never bury any of that. It tells them that it's timely. And I've been saying this a lot to my clients lately and to some folks here is the why is the most important because that tells you the angle and the peg and the hook of your story. But why are you telling me this now? The word now for me is even more important because that speaks to the timeliness, relevancy, and the newsworthiness of it. So why are you telling me this now versus 6 months ago or 6 months
Mhm.
from now? Um, and all of that speaks to the audience. And so I still can't get the audience out of my head. TV has and media has a duty to the audience, the viewing public, but so do our story pitches, I think. And then if you can get that story to benefit the audience and then slide your client right into it, oh my gosh, it's a win-win. It's like going fishing and it's so much fun.
Adam, how about you?
Well, if you are going into comms like I am and you're handling media inquiries, one thing that drove me insane as a reporter was when a PIO just didn't even respond to my initial inquiry at 8:30 or 9 in the morning. Um, First thing I'll do is I'll say, hey, good morning. Thanks for sending this. I'm working on it. What's your deadline? Or setting realistic expectations. Like we have inquiries for council members who are flying internationally today. So I'm not going to string the reporter on and say, oh, well, let me check in. Like I know they're not available. So, and I know that they need to do a story today, whether it's this story or another. And so, that is a way to immediately build trust with a reporter that they know you're a straight shooter and whatnot. But one of the great thing in government is you get a lot of government type pitches, which are incredibly boring. Um, so I have kind of like a little reputation with some of my news organizations being a little tongue in cheek with some of my direct pitches. So we had a story. We needed community feedback about how to spend federal grant funds. Like, okay, this is like government 101, but this is incredibly important. So I wrote this email to some of the news stations who I knew the assignment directors, and I said in the subject line, I was like, super interesting story. And the first line, I was like, thanks for opening it. And I, just like Jessica said, I wrote basically a mini VO for them. I wrote why it's important, and I even had a couple like tongue-in-cheek jokes like for our Phoenix residents, aka your viewers, they can decide how our federal tax dollars are formed. It was one of those programs we have that doesn't get a lot of coverage. I didn't get any responses other than from my buddy at Fox 10 who thought it was funny, but it was kind of a different tactic in that because we get a lot of those. But just being really responsive and respectful of the reporter's time.
Ali, how does your perspective show up in your work?
I really try to push the envelope at all times, obviously. And I think, as the fire department typically is pretty well received from a lot of the community and media, there's never really like, I don't want to say a desperate need for media attention. When you have 3 mountain rescues in one day on Camelback Mountain, like every media outlet and random blogger, etc., is calling, texting, emailing us for interviews. And so the whole media concept within the fire department, it's always been there. They didn't really need any crazy new revamping in that sense, but it very much so was that storytelling and safety campaign type of aspect of, the house fires, the incidents, etc. That's always made the news. And so they never really struggled with that. But there were certain things that the fire chief would come to me and say, there was a historic amount of drownings last year in the city of Phoenix, and we have got to do something different. And I don't want it just, we talk about it after the fact and we say 2 seconds is too long, period. We need something else. And so how can we do that? And so, yes, there is a storytelling component to that, but there also is, a PR perspective, a marketing perspective, a human element to it. And so as a, former reporter, I took it upon myself, and something that is very, I guess you could say, traditional within the city of Phoenix and the fire department. Adam knows it as the former Parks and Recs PIO, is a mock drowning. The city of Phoenix always holds a mock drowning. And it has been 3-4 years that I have pushed the envelope on this mock drowning. Yes, I do think that we can scare people straight with something like that, but also the amount of times that we have gotten extra creative and we have built really good relationships with parents that have lost a child from a drowning. What more is more compelling on a story than an interview with a mom talking about that? And so I've really tried to think about, what are the main things that the fire department's mission or safety messaging we really want to focus on, but then what's the best way to get that message out there? And I always try to put on my reporter hat and think, we don't just want the PIO talking in front of a fire truck talking about water safety. And so I've really made an effort to try and connect with the members within the fire department so they know when something good happens or when something scary happens, a close call, etc. They call public affairs and we want to tell that story for them. And so earlier this year, there was a near drowning in Moon Valley. And luckily, the water was so cold that it allowed this little boy to essentially survive. And his entire family came back to the fire station. They thanked the crews, they thanked the police officer, and it was a really good reunion. And that made incredible news coverage. But on top of that, it's really cool to see too that these were all relationships that we were able to leverage, bringing in people to, it wasn't easy to get the family to go on camera. I had to talk to them multiple times. They were ashamed, they were embarrassed. I totally understand. I mean, I can't imagine, but at the same time, we made sure we did it in a respectful way that they were comfortable with, because they wanted to help prevent this for another family potentially. And so instead of doing a mock drowning last year, we did that reunion. And think about how much more emotional and compelling that story is than us having a fake drowning. So that's kind of where I've really tried to bring my reporter-esque into my comms life.
And just to piggyback off what Ali said, like a lot of times our audience, Ali and mine, are our own directors or city council. So a lot of stories and initiatives that we might do in the communications office will likely pop up at a subcommittee meeting or at a formal meeting. So, sometimes our audience is telling those stories to, support an initiative or give details or context to why we close trails during the hottest parts of the day. And so, us being there is also supported for our own teams. Because they're like, hey, you're hyping us up and you've got our back and sharing our stories as well.
Adam, I'm going to stay with you for a minute and I'm going to shake things up a little bit because there's a question that I do want to get to that I may have not included initially. But with some of the major changes happening in newsrooms and people shifting their perspective on journalists and layoffs in the newsroom, I'm curious as to how you think the PR industry will shift to account for media relations and storytelling. Or do you think PR pros are learning new skills and leaning into practices beyond traditional media relations?
Yes, absolutely. And I think about this all the time, is what is the role of local news and where is local news the bread and butter? Like, is that where people are going? Or is that just the way it's always been? And as one of the few millennials who watches local news, and pays attention, which as PR people, we should, I really kind of ventured away from focusing on local news, still pitching stories to them, obviously. But when I was with Parks, I think we were the first department, maybe in the city, but we partnered with an Instagram influencer account. And so that was kind of new ground for the city of Phoenix. And so you're asking directors to spend taxpayer dollars on advertising on Instagram. And so to a millennial, I'm like, oh, of course, that's where people are. That's where I am. I'm constantly sharing reels with friends. But to a director who is maybe a little, more traditional, that's pretty jarring. Now we were able to get 4 reels for like $1,000, which is an absolute steal. But if I told that to my dad who's 70, he'd be like, that's a waste of money, So I think the pitching and the storytelling and those skills are still there, but the medium in which you are looking for and which people are digesting is always going to be changing. Like we did an interview with for one of our council members with the host of a community Facebook group, like just a random Facebook group in their community, but it had like 50,000 followers. So they did an interview, and that's direct to consumer, direct to constituent advertising that local news probably cannot get you. And so I had like a come to Jesus moment about a year and a half in, especially with hiking safety, because I was probably on camera 30 times one summer talking about our trail closure policy. And I was like, what are we not getting? And so we ended up moving toward, Instagram. We did Facebook ads. I even helped revive like a hiking group. And I was like, is there something in person that I can be doing aside from like physically shaking you at the trailhead? But I think that as PR professionals, you have the skill set to pitch a story, and the story is still good, but you have to find where the people are actually watching it. And I don't know if that's local news anymore.
This is a
Interesting.
great
And that's the end of
question.
my TED Talk.
This is such a hard question, and much like Adam, I think about it a lot. And I've had a lot of conversations with friends in TV, and it makes me nervous because I feel like whatever happens to their business affects ours because our two businesses are so symbiotic. Meanwhile, here we are watching if this $6.2 billion Nexstar Tegna buyout is going to happen, and what is that going to mean to Channel 12 and AZTV? Um, and I have a lot of thoughts about what that means. But while while the conglomerations are happening and the media groups are joining forces or whatever, I still go back in my mind to the local markets. Local is so hyper local. People still need to know their weather locally in their own town, or if the freeway is gridlocked, they want to know that the circus came to town or is coming. They want to know if there's a shooting in their neighborhood. So I keep thinking, well, we'll be okay, right? But at the same time, we've been tasked with clients wanting the Instagram influencer. So one of the surprising things about this role is how much research is involved. You could spend hours researching Instagram influencers and trying to figure out how to even reach them. Also, I had that issue with I had a client on Nancy Grace, and he was like, where do you even watch Nancy Grace? I had to subscribe to some channel and then realize, oh, she's on YouTube. YouTube is a massive platform we can't forget about. And sometimes these numbers they're pulling in higher numbers than the local stations are. So, we can't forget about those things. So it's interesting. We're always kind of spreading our wings and researching and doing things that even out of our comfort zone, but we have to do it. We have to adapt.
Allie?
I really go back to how radio was adapting in its own sense. So, it wasn't just going on air, it was also writing for the web department, doing videos for social media, and potentially long form storytelling. And so, the fact that KTAR still is what it is today. Obviously, it isn't what it once was, but the fact that they have evolved with the times and they are still such a powerhouse in local media, but it's just now looking at where we're at in today with PR or communications. I think there are still, I think especially within the fire department in general, social media is such a foreign thing. And it's sometimes people think it's just, oh, it's dumb dog videos and it's this and it's that and it's bad and all this kinds of stuff. And it's like, how many studies and surveys do we all need to be just pounded through our heads that that's where everyone's getting their news. They're getting their news on whatever their latest, whether it's a push alert through whatever app that they have on their phone, or is it actually on Instagram or X, etc. And so I think being able to leverage that, whether you are in local media or as a comms person or in PR, that is the new way of the future. And I know we push that so hard within the fire department because how can we compete otherwise? We have such a vast audience and we have internal communication struggles, and it's the same thing. Our members aren't checking emails, but you know what they are checking? Social media. And so really trying to combat those struggles and just getting with where we know our people want their information. And so that's kind of my perspective on changing as things start to evolve. But I have seen, you know, just even Adam kind of referenced the mass exodus at ABC 15. I very proudly stamp myself as one of the first people to leave KTAR, and I started that mass exodus. And so it's crazy when I'm like trying to call the newsroom and I don't recognize anyone's names, or I'm trying to pitch a story or whatever, and I'm just like, holy cow, this really is changing so much. So it's pretty wild to see what's changed in the last, you know, 4 years since I haven't been there.
Yeah. I want to get to a couple of the questions in our chat before we run over time. So one of the questions that we received was, so someone says, one of the hardest parts for me was my name no longer associated with my writing. I was ghostwriting for other people and writing other people's statements. Was this tough for anyone else? And let's just keep it to one or two responses on this one.
Yes, as someone who formerly loves being on TV and still loves being in front of the camera, it is tough. I find the joy in making them look good and making sure that they are propped up. It's kind of like you're my kid moment, you know, brush, you know, make sure your hair is straight and everything. I'm able to find joy in that, but yeah, that is tough when you put so much work into one thing, to hear it come from somebody else and they get all the credit. That's part of the job, and I think, you know, it'll just take time, but that means you care, at least, you know, about what you're doing.
Yeah, I will agree with Adam. I vividly remember my former boss, Shelley, telling me that this was a thankless job, which was a great way to welcome me to the position. But it very much so, that's those days. I hate to say that, and I'm glad Adam started with his huge ego because it softens my blow. But yeah, as reporters or as people on camera, or like the fact that, like, yeah, my name's Ali Pardi now, but everyone still knows me as Ali Vetnar, and that just drives my husband crazy. He's like, "You're not in news anymore." I'm like, "I am Ali Vetnar forever." But that it's your name is your identity, and it's hard when you I would imagine most of the folks on this call, we all started our careers straight out of school in journalism and in reporting, and that is your identity, your career, your storytelling. And so that was a huge adjustment for me. And so once I kind of, you know, swallowed my ego and I was okay with, hey, I can be a team player and this is, you know, for the good of the group. And then, you know, I replied to someone's message in the chat. There are so many trade-offs, and I would so much rather be paid a decent wage, have holidays off, and have, you know, more respect in my workplace than having to just have my name and face associated with my work. So, you know, pick and choose those things wisely. That would be my encouragement.
Another question that we have was about landing the position. Did you network while you were still in the news? Did you already know someone internally to help you get the job, or did you just apply cold turkey?
I'll jump on that. I also replied in the chat. I'm sorry, I didn't really realize how that worked, but I very much so had a very strong relationship with the fire department based on my reporting. I did a lot of public safety stories, and so that very much so helped me. They knew what I was about. They knew, you know, my work ethic. They knew me personally. So I do believe that helped me get to where I am today. But I would just say for anyone on this call, never stop networking. I vividly remember going to, you know, food bank stories or, you know, press gaggles with Governor Ducey, and just trying to like make relationships with his staff, because you never know, one, maybe you want a job down the road that they could help you with, but also now in my position, how could those, you know, once they put the dots together and they figure out, oh, Allie's no longer at KTAR, she's now at the fire department. So I have friends that I interviewed at APS or SRP or Chicanas por la Casa, and we can work together as, you know, like community relations and outreach. And because of those relationships and that networking, it's now helping me in this role. And so, you know, you never want to burn any bridges. You never, you never know what you're going to need down the road. So I always encourage folks to keep those lines open.
Thank
I
you.
agree with that. I put out some feelers, and it's amazing how much people will clamor to help you. And there seemed to be a little bit of a frenzy. I had 3 interviews in one day, and you just have to ask the question. I'm thinking about making a move. What do you think about that? And then they can give you a temperature of what it's like in that, specific market or industry that you're looking at, whether it's, government or maybe a smaller agency or, the corporate way. Just depends, but definitely putting out the feelers is so smart.
And one last question I want to get to is what about your future career goals? Do you plan to stay in PR? What hopes do you have for your future?
Well, if anybody's looking for the city of Phoenix, I love it here, and there's a lot of upward mobility. I've only been in this job for about a year, but um, right now, I guess if I had to, I'll probably be here for a few more years and then see what opens. But I love the government communication side of things, the local municipality and all the meetings and stuff. So for right now, I'm a city of Phoenix guy until retirement comes.
I feel the same way. I can't imagine going back. This is just too good. I feel big wins every time our clients win. Like I said before, it feels like you're going fishing and then to land a fish and then to watch their reaction. It's just so fun.
I have to agree with Adam. Once you're in the city of Phoenix, it's like you're in this new kind of newsroom family. In a sense, the communications office has really created an incredible team. And even though I'm kind of on the outskirts down at fire admin, I'm not at city hall, just virtually, we're always connected. And that's something I really, really love. I love the people that I work with. I love the benefits, all those kinds of things. But in true Ali fashion, I can't sit still. Once I finally got a full staff team of 3 people, and now I'm like, okay, what's the next thing? And so, as you kind of talked about at the beginning, I recently became certified to teach for the state, the FEMA Public Information Officer courses, and that's something I've been doing on the side that I really enjoy because a lot of that, for folks on the call that are not familiar with just like the basics of PIO, it's so militaristic and police and fire language. And I have understood that and I've gotten, that type of stuff under my belt for incident management and those types of things. Public safety is very near and dear to my heart with my family, all that kinds of stuff. But it's also really important for them to have that communications and PR perspective as well when leveraging, a crisis even, which is crazy to think about. But that's kind of my new thing. It's obviously it's still a part of my job with the fire department, but it's somewhere I can continue to challenge myself and grow and potentially deploy to incidents and things like that. So that's kind of my next thing, maybe.
Very cool. Thank you. We're running short on time. We're pretty much out of time. And so to respect everyone's time, we're just going to wrap up. But if we didn't get to any of your questions in the chat, we'll make sure to send them to our panelists and send them to you in a follow-up